Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. So today I have my update for my No Pan Left Behind project. So I just started this a couple months ago and I am working on 2 palettes at a time, randomly generated, and the goal with this is just to use each shade in the palette one time. So I have these 2 to talk about for you today, and I'm going to start with the one that we first rolled in, which was I Heart Revolution Beauty and the Beast. So there are 18 shades in this palette that I needed to use. I did not count the blush shades, though I do think I used those at least once or twice when I was reaching into this palette. The face shades are super nice, but my focus was just on the eyeshadows, and I am happy to say that I did use each of these shades at least one time while it has been in this project. So I'm going to run through each of the shades and just kind of talk about my thoughts very briefly. And as I'm talking, I will have looks rolling through on the screen. So this first one up here is the shade Library. This is a really nice matte brown shade. It is a little bit warm tone compared to the other browns within this palette, but it still works and is still a shade that I use quite often. Next we have the shade West Wing, which I don't really use the kind of warmer toned, rosy toned shades in this palette all that often. I tend to stick to a select handful, but this shade was actually super nice. It was really buildable, really blendable, so I did enjoy it quite a bit. So I have kind of similar thoughts on Rose, which is more of the red tone matte shade. It is also super nice. Again, not one I've reached for a ton, but really buildable, blendable, and performed super nicely. So I am really happy that I got some good use on those 2 shades. Next up is Cogsworth, which is one of my most used shades within this palette. I think this one is super pretty. At first glance, it just kind of looks like a classic brown shade, but I feel like it almost has a little bit of a purple undertone to it, which makes it a little bit more unique, and I think this one's super pretty and easy to use for every day. Next up, we have the shade Mrs. Potts, which I actually hit pan on during this project, so I was super excited about that. This is just a classic cream matte shade, but it's super nice, easy to use. Next up we have the shade Ballroom. So this is a little bit more yellow gold than I would like. If you know me, you know I am not a fan of yellow gold eyeshadows, and this one definitely leans that way. It has a little bit of an orangey undertone to it, but still pretty yellowy goldish shade and not a favorite. Next up we have the shade Belle, which is this brighter matte blue shade. This is a nice shade for packing down, but it's not really a blending shade. It doesn't blend super well with other shades, at least not really in the look that I used it in. So I still really like the shade, it's just not really one that I would use to blend with. Next is the shade Lumiere, which is a nice lighter gold shade. It still has a little bit of a yellow gold color to it, but this one is definitely lighter and more wearable for me, so I do really like that one. Next to that is the shade Enchantress. This is another favorite of mine. It is a beautiful deep blue shimmer. I used it on my lower lash line for this project. I really enjoy using it as a winged liner, packed in my outer corner, so this is a really fun shade to incorporate into looks, and it just adds a little interest with it being a blue shade. So next up is the shade Petal. This one is, again, not one I use a ton, but this one is really pretty. It's a little bit of a drier formula, not super shimmery, but it still looks pretty on the lid for more rosy pink looks. Next is the shade Spell, and when I first got this palette, it was not a favorite of mine. I did not think I was going to like that shade, but I actually really do. I think it's super pretty, and it's just a kind of wearable green shade, and I find it super easy to incorporate into different looks. Next to that is Beast, which is another of the brown shades. I do kind of wish this one was a matte brown, just to deepen up Library a little bit, but it does work nicely in my outer corner. It is a shimmer, so I can't really use it for deepening the crease as much. So these next two, Little Town and Chip, I kind of have similar views on. They are not my favorite colors within this palette. Little Town, I feel like it just doesn't really go with some of the colors in this palette. Like, if I'm going to be reaching for the pinky red shades, I'm going to reach for these two. So that one I feel like doesn't have as much of a place in this palette. And then Chip is just kind of a classic orange matte, and orange is one of my least favorite eyeshadow colors. There are definitely oranges in my collection that I like, but this just isn't really one of them. They both perform nicely, just color-wise, not ones I'm reaching for a ton. Next up is the shade Beauty. This is a really fun yellow shimmer shade. I love these lighter yellow shades. I know that probably sounds a little bit like a contradiction with me not liking yellow golds, but they are definitely different, and I think this one is fun to reach for. Moving on to the bottom row here, we have Gaston. That is a really pretty red shimmer shade. I really enjoy using that in my outer corner, especially when I'm reaching for more warm tone looks. So that is one that I do really enjoy. Next to that we have Gray Stuff. This is the one that I use to deepen up my more neutral looks. And again, I do wish that I had a matte brown shade instead. I get the theming of this one with the gray stuff part of the song, but I do kind of wish it was a more neutral shade. Then the final shade we have here is Magic Mirror, which is just a really pretty icy white shade. I typically use that in my inner corner. This is the first shade I hit pan on within this palette. I hit pan on it, I think, last year. But that one is super pretty, easy to use, nice inner corner shade. So again, I did use all of the shades within this palette, so this one will be rolling out and we will be rolling in our new palette at the end of this video. Alright, so the second palette I had rolled in was my Rude Cosmetics Roaring 20s Indulgence palette. So here is what this one looks like. So I have not yet completed using all of the shades within this palette, but I am going to run through the shades that I have used and talk about my thoughts on those, and again, I will have looks popping up on the screen. So the first shade I have used is Art Deco, which is just a really nice everyday lid shade. I feel like it looks a little more purple toned in the pan. It shows up more neutral on the lid, which is fine. It's still a really nice, easy to use color. I do kind of wish it had that purple undertone to it, but it's still super pretty. Next up, I used Harlem. This one, again, super easy to use, very nice initial transition shade, pretty neutral, pretty true neutral. So I do really enjoy that one. I think it's super easy to use. It's definitely one I will reach for more in the future. Next up, I have used the shade Polo. This is a really nice deepening shade. I do wish it showed up a little bit darker on the eyes. It definitely takes some building and it does have a nice depth to it. I just wish it was a little bit darker because I feel like it does look pretty deep within the pan. Next, I've used the shade Zoot Suit. So this one is a shade that I've used a lot in my inner corner. This was in my Pan Those Eyeshadows, and I have gotten quite a bit of use on this one. It has a little bit of a pink shift to it as well. I feel like the base of this isn't super opaque, so it takes quite a bit of building to get it to kind of pack down, and even then I feel like it just doesn't look super pigmented. I wish it was a little bit more shimmery white, but it's still a nice inner corner shade. Definitely can't complain too much about it. Then I've used Sidecar, which is the shade next to that one. Again, a super nice neutral shade. Another kind of true neutral. I really like to use this one to deepen up the shade Harlem. I feel like those two perform really nicely together, and I just really like the tone of this one. I think it's super nice. A little bit more on the basic side, but it's still a nice shade. Then the final shade I have used is Hotsy Totsy. This is the first time I've ever used this shade, but it was pretty nice. It does take a little bit of building, but I just reached for this on my outer corner. I feel like that is typically how I will end up reaching for this shade, and it did perform well. I feel like this one would work best on a wet brush, so definitely one I need to test out more. Again, this was my first ever time using it, so I don't really have a full understanding of how I like to use it yet, but it was pretty nice. So those are all of the shades that I have used in this palette so far, so quite a few left to do, but I am happy to be keeping this one in and making sure I get my use on this palette. It is a super easy one for me to use. I just was kind of focusing on other shades this past month, so didn't get too much use on this one. So I will be rolling in one new palette to this project, so I am super excited. I do kind of hope I get a smaller palette to work on for this next one, but we will just have to wait and see. So I have my No Pan Left Behind wheel pulled up here, and we are just going to spin it for our new palette. I Heart Revolution Sleeping Beauty. Not a smaller palette, but definitely one that I am excited to get some use on. So here is my I Heart Revolution Sleeping Beauty palette. Same collection as the Beauty and the Beast one that just rolled out. So once again, I will not be focusing on the blush and highlighter shades. I'm just going to focus on the 18 eyeshadows. This one does have a fun color story. Definitely lots of different colors to use, so this one will be fun to reach for. I don't know how long it will take me. This is not a palette I reach for a ton, but it will definitely be good to get some dedicated use on this one, just because, again, I don't do that a ton. So really excited that this one is rolling in, and hopefully I will be able to get some good progress on it by the next update or two. So these are our two palettes in for this next round. I am super excited about them. They are larger palettes, which are going to take me longer to reach for all of the shades, but I am definitely up for that challenge. Super excited about these ones. I think they will be good ones to get some use on, so be sure to stay tuned for my next update. Let me know what else you would like to see from me. Give this video a thumbs up if you did enjoy, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future uploads. I am really trying to get to 500 subscribers, so if you are willing to subscribe, I would really appreciate it. And with all of that said, I will see you in my next video. Bye!